So we're just thrilled to have you all with us in attendance tonight. And without further ado, I would like to go ahead and introduce tonight's speaker. And I'm really thrilled to be able to introduce my friend, Victor Davila. I get the honor of serving with him nationally through AIGA, and I have shared a stage with him, a very large stage with him at the Creative South Conference, a rather intimidating stage at the Creative South Conference. And there is at least one Creative South person in this audience I noticed tonight. So let me tell you a little bit about Victor before we move it on over to him. Victor is an illustrator and designer from the Orlando, Florida area, as well as an associate professor in the University of Central Florida's School of Visual Arts and Design. He teaches illustration and design there. He's worked on everything from character designs and storyboards for animation to editorial illustrations, interactive games, and children's books. Just so much, so much there. Victor is also the founder of the Central Florida Illustrator Collective, Giant Illustrators, the President's Council Chair for AIGA, President Emeritus of AIGA Orlando, a member of the AIGA Design Educators Community, steering committee, which I'm also a part of, and a Creative Mornings Orlando team member, and an Adobe Education Leader. Incredible. Victor, welcome everyone. Welcome Victor Davila.
Thank you so much, Meena. I'm really happy to be here, and I appreciate all the students and everyone from wherever you're joining us that took your Thursday nights to come and hang out with us. But first of all, I'd like to thank you all for being here again, and I'd like to thank Meena. And let me just talk a little bit about Meena. My presentation is going to start off with Meena and how amazing she is and how lucky you all are to have Meena as a teacher and a colleague. And we're in the South, right? This is South Carolina, so I can keep saying y'all, and y'all kind of like, you're with me here, right? So Meena is a powerhouse and a leader. She's one of my leaders in AIGA Design Educators Community, and she does so much for our community. So I just want to kind of like applaud my friend and just kind of like point out how amazingly awesome she is, which I'm sure you guys all know. But today, what I'd like to talk is about, I'm going to talk a little bit about myself and my work. And I also like to thank Meena for inviting me, considering she probably knows I ramble. So I'm going to try to keep all my rambling to like, excuse me, 40 minutes of time frame that I have, so that I can have some Q&A at the end. But pretty much this sheet is something I have that I carry with me every time I do public talks. When Meena and I first met, we were on a stage at Creative South, and I actually had this sheet printed out, because what it does is it reminds me of everyone who's important to me and who's kind of cheering me on, or at least representations of these people. So this sheet, this piece of paper kind of represents everything I like about me. So I have my kids, Lucas and Emma, up there in my corner. I have my, excuse me, my parents and my family. I have amazing students. This is class of 16 or 17. So I continually have amazing students that are always cheering me on. I have a community, well, I'm one slide behind. I have a community and family of the Orlando creative community that I love and support me. My Giant Illustrators group is always on my back. I have AIGA Orlando. I have my missus, which I think I skipped back there in the corner, that she's been my great supporter. And then of course, Superman, because Superman is my, I don't know if you can see my background, but that's me as Superman, as Hobbit Victor Superman. So it's one of those things that it kind of like brings me like a focus, having this in my hands. And I thought I'd include this just because this is the one I had when I met Meena. And it's also a reminder for me not to spaz out when I'm in front of people. So as the years have passed beyond this sheet, things have changed. So obviously, ever since I've had this sheet, I started becoming involved with Limbitless Solutions, which I'll talk a little bit about in a bit, which is one of my the groups that I love being a part of. My kids aren't so little anymore, so they're taller than me now, which doesn't really take much. This is my student class last year, how it was for a lot of people. And I just got to meet some of them face to face more recently. And then I have a dog now. So that's Theo. So my work is predominantly illustration. I'm laughing because I just saw somebody pop in. That's one of my students, my former students. So it's kind of cool. So they hear me ramble enough. So it's kind of funny that they joined us. So my work is predominantly illustration. But I do have the benefit of being able to couple illustration with design. So I have the kind of, I kind of have my feet in both sides of the pond, so to speak. When I was younger, I was sure that I was going to be one of Disney's 9 Old Men. And if you're not familiar with Disney's 9 Old Men, those are the group of artists that created a lot of the classic Disney movies, right? Those are the ones that Disney referred to for the big jobs of the big movies everywhere. One from like maybe after Snow White, but Cinderella, all the way up to like the 60s with Robin Hood and things like that. But the 9 Old Men, I wanted to be a Disney animator. And it wasn't just because I lived in Orlando and I grew up in Orlando. I was born in Puerto Rico, but I grew up in Orlando. But it was just that's the kind of world that I want to be a part of, the ones that told stories with my drawings that were able to connect with a whole bunch of people. So it was either that or I wanted to be part of Termite Terrace. And Termite Terrace is the same thing, but they're over on the Looney Tunes side. So I always thought that it might be fun to really work with like the designers. You didn't see a lot of cartoon characters popping their eyes out in Disney cartoons, but you would see it with the Tex Avery cartoons at Termite Terrace and Warner Brothers with Bugs Bunny and all that stuff. Or I saw myself being a comic book artist at some point, drawing Spider-Man or Superman or Batman, you know, one of those characters on a monthly basis, because I love the mythology and I love the storytelling aspect of it. And I love the fact that you can tell stories with my drawings. And that was pretty much the direction that I was going to. Excuse me. Throughout school, I was clearly the class artist. I was always drawing in the corners of my margins of my books. It's something that helped me think. It helped me concentrate. And my teachers understood that. And they even got to the point that when I had to do term papers, sometimes my teachers would allow me to just make a comic book out of whatever term paper I was meant to do. So it was very clear about my path was going to be this direction that I had. And I was on the yearbook staff, and I got a little bit of introduction to graphic design that way. But it wasn't until like when I was like 16 or so that, in an effort to make money to like take out my high school crush, to ask her out on a date, I got a job at Publix. Do y'all have Publix up in South Carolina? Publix is awesome. I love Publix. I worked there for 6 years, and I started off working at the bakery, and I'd make the donuts, I'd wash the dishes at the bakery and things like that. But right after like 3 months of working there, they found out that I could draw. So they moved me over to the grocery side. So I'd go in twice a week at Publix after school, and I would be handed one of these markers, and I would draw the sale signs for Publix. So back in the day, we'd have these neon starbursts that would say something like, Chips Ahoy, 99 cents or whatever. And I'd go around and draw it with these thick markers. Unfortunately, none of this work exists anymore. I don't know, it's before phones, so we didn't take pictures of it. It's just kind of like, it's there somewhere. Or there would be these end caps where they would have signs over the end caps. So I would draw one side with a drawing and then the other side with text. So for instance, it would be Campbell's soup would be on sale for $1.50 or whatever. So I would draw a picture of the Campbell's kids, those little, round-faced kids. And then I would draw like the text next to it. So it was like a cartoon with the text. And that was my real first introduction to the fact that I could do both. Like I could take this imagery that I created and combine it with typography to really send a message or to relay and communicate a message. And again, it doesn't exist, but I still carry sketchbooks, which I'm going to talk about in a second. And I'm not like a classically trained calligrapher. Everything I do with like these Prismacolor markers, but it allowed me to create like a fluid notion of typography, of lettering, of not being able to rotate the marker so I get thicks and thins, and that is the kind of thing that I would do for my for Publix, and I was there for 6 years. So it was one of those things that I thought I was going in one direction, but as the song goes, life is what happens while you're busy making other plans. And I found myself being drawn more to graphic design. And I think looking back, I lucked out. I have a lot of friends that continue with the animation, and they struggled in the animation field, especially when it was things they did a lot of like traditionally drawn animation, and they started moving to CG, 3D animation. So they kind of struggled, and I've never had a moment in my career where I was struggling for work, because I feel that the fact that I could do both really helped me out. And just if you're keeping notes, I ended up marrying my high school sweetheart, so it all worked out in that sense too. The high school crush that I went to Publix to ask out, we got married a few years later, and we're still married. So my career has been one of those things where I've been able to combine everything I love to do in many different ways. So I'd still be able to do editorial work. I've been able to do stuff like these little models for Scholastic, where I would draw and they would make these figures out of it. I still drew comic strips. This one was for a company who was doing a magazine for Walmart's, and it had to be bilingual. And I was still, at the time, I would, excuse me, work in-house at the University of Central Florida, where I would still do prints. I would do designs for websites. I worked at the Center for Distributed Learning, so we do brochures, but we'd also do graphics for websites and things like that. I was also able to work in animation. So the fact that the beauty of design is that it allows you to do so much. It's just not one thing, which I think is really one of the best things about it. Everything that I do, I try to merge the illustrations with the imagery to tell the stories. I was still working with characters. I was working with the fun things, but at the same time, I was working with typography, lettering, and and that kind of thing that defines illustration. All right. So enough about me. I want to talk about a little bit about creativity, if I can, because I think we've all, everyone in this room has chosen to lead a life of creativity in an effort to put things out there, to send a message. And creativity is one of those things that leads to innovations, it breakthroughs, and pushes society forward. And I'm a big believer in the stupid idea. I'm a huge believer in the stupid idea. And excuse me. And maybe stupid is not the right word. Maybe it's just the ridiculous idea, because I feel like every major thing that has happened, at least in the 20th and 21st century, that we probably love, probably started as a stupid idea. Disneyland was called a stupid idea. The iPhone, the automobile, the electric car, Star Wars, they all at some point were referred to like, that's a ridiculous idea, you shouldn't do it. And I think it's easy to be discouraged by the naysayers, but if you believe in yourself and your quote unquote stupid idea, you can change your world. And there's this quote that I always think about that's probably quoted, I think it's probably Picasso. It could be a lot of people, but it's probably Picasso, about like every child is an artist. The problem is how to remain an artist once we grow up. And I like to change that as to like, every child is creative. The problem is how to remain creative as we grow up. Because I think once you become a teenager and you start, people start not being they start being a little bit more critical as to what you do, it's very easy to be discouraged. So I commend everybody in this room to really embrace the creative life and go forward with it. But one thing I like to point out to everybody, my wife works in HR, my mom was an accountant, my dad was a carpenter. and a restaurant owner. And I think, we all think that creatives are only the people who can draw or create posters. And creativity, I think, is something that we all have. That it's just a new way of doing things, a new way of thinking, right? A new way of introducing something to an idea or to a society or to a culture that hasn't necessarily been thought of before. And Apple made a whole campaign of it, which is one of my favorite campaigns ever, pinpointing the people who did that. So as you look at the people in this poster, not all of them are artists. We have an athlete, we have two athletes in there, we have a scientist, we have a pilot, a musician in there, right? So, excuse me. So it's not, creativity can come in so many different forms and from people from all sorts of mindsets. So along with the history that I just shared with you as my background, I just wanted to share a few things that helped me foster my creative mindset, that helped me with my illustrations and my graphic design, and maybe show you a little bit more of a peek into my my brain. The first thing I like to do when I'm drawing, illustrating, is I try to be inspired by things outside my immediate sphere of influence. And by that, I mean that I think we get stuck with the people that we follow on Dribbble or on Instagram, and that's like the myopic view of art that we see. One of my issues with sites like that is that we all only see those things, and it starts becoming like redundant. So if one person does an image about Baby Yoda, suddenly there's 15 images of Baby Yoda, or whatever it is, or the Queen's Gambit, or I forgot her name, but it's that kind of stuff. So I would encourage everyone to go past what they know and try to be influenced by other things outside their general sphere. And I think it might be clear that one of my big inspirations is Alexander Girard. And if you don't know who Alexander Girard, please look him up, because he is mid-century modern, beautiful work, right? And there's also kind of a sense of Mary Blair, big-headed kids. And if you don't know Mary Blair, again, mid-century modern, I guess there's a pattern in my work, but it's beautiful work. She was Walt Disney's go-to concept artist, right? A trailblazer in the field. And that part of the inspiration is obvious. I fawn over this work, but at the same time, my favorite current designer right now is someone who does something totally different from what I do, which is Mark Newsom. I don't know how to do this. I have no idea what it takes to make a chair or a car like this. But the fact that he is creating things that nobody else is creating, or at least in a ways that nobody else, like he created this concept car and the trunk is a drawer, things like that. Will it work in real life? Maybe, maybe not. But the fact that you're able to make that leap and embrace that idea and go with it, I think says a lot. And while it might not be overly obvious in my work, while I might not be an industrial designer to do things like that, you might be able to see like the wonkiness of the shape of the car, or the wonkiness of the shape of the loungers in my work, right? So one of the main things I do is to look outside that sphere of illustration, whether it's a Tarantino movie, which this is from Kill Bill, and when they're fighting and it goes to like silhouettes on a blue background, that kind of stuff, or Wes Anderson movies with the color schemes and the symmetry and the costume designs. And I didn't mention it here, but Annie Atkins, if you don't know who Annie Atkins is, she's a graphic designer that does a lot of the Wes Anderson movies. I encourage you to go see her talks, or architecture or things like that, Frank Gehry. So I go outside your bubble. If you haven't already, take a walk, go out in nature. South Carolina is a beautiful area for nature, right? With them, you all have mountains other than Space Mountain, right? So I think I'd encourage you to go out and be one with nature, and allow yourself to be influenced by that. The other thing is that, excuse me, some of these might be a little bit cliche, but the reason I think they're cliche is because they should be followed and they're important, is do things that make you uncomfortable. And the way I do that is that, I don't jump out of an airplane or anything like that, but one of the things that truly made me uncomfortable is public speaking. And at some point I recognized that in order to continue to grow in my profession, I had to get better at it. I had to be able to relay information to someone. So that's when I started joining AIGA, started joining Creative Mornings. Sometimes I would get so nervous in front of people that I would physically vibrate. Like I would shake so much that I felt I was going to vibrate down through the floor. And it's, luckily we live in a community that people were supportive and they give me applause and things like that. But you get used to it. And the more you practice, the more you do it. So that's the reason one of the reasons I took a job as a teacher. That's one of the reasons. And there's Meena, that's when we met. That was a great night. So I've gotten nervous in front of students. I've failed miserably when speaking in front of students. And then you make it a learning moment. It's like, why did I get nervous? It's almost like by seeing me nervous, they're like, okay, it's okay to be nervous. And then if Victor can kind of like do badly at that in some ways, maybe it's all right if I do it a couple of times and I can get better. So that was my uncomfortable moment. And that's what I've tried to work at. And that's, I encourage you to identify whatever that is and be able to conquer it the best way you can. And give yourself specifications. This one is a weird one because we always say to think outside of the box. And one of the things I would encourage you to do is maybe not give yourself limitations, but give yourself certain specifications and certain kind of a certain sandbox to do. Because I think designers thrive on that. And I think that's a lot when our creativity and innovation comes from, right? So one of the ways I do that is I like to read books. I like to read like novels and things like that. Oscar Wilde, The Road, and The Martian. I read, that kind of stuff. So when I read a book, this is one of those things I've never shown anyone. You're all the first people I've showed it because it's kind of like a sketchbook thing. So when I finish reading a book, I give myself like a project. In class, we do these sprints in class where I tell the students that I introduce something, they have like the class period to do it, and it's really short and really quick. And so this is like a sprint for me. At the end of the books, I give myself like specifications that I'm going to do a cover for that. And in this one, I had to use a photograph. I couldn't use illustration. I had to do it within 2 hours or something like that. And so I had to create a book. It's my own challenge. I don't have to show it to anybody. It was just something for me. But I think that allows me, those little sprints that I do for myself allows me to get quicker at what I do, but it also allows me to get myself in an uncomfortable position. The only person I have to answer to is me, but still it allows me to kind of like push myself in areas that I might not necessarily do. All right. This is a two-parter, the next one. And this one's obvious if you know me or if you know Meena. I would highly encourage you to get involved in your creative community. This is currently my my affiliations, and I forgot Adobe Education Leader, which is a really important one. So I have to go back and fix that. We can change it in post, Meena. But and that's just like this year. This is the ones that I'm currently involved with right now. And it has opened so many doors. I've met people like Meena. I've met people like Diane Gibbs, who is our other kind of hero that was with us. It has allowed me to meet some of my heroes, whether it's Debbie Millman or Michael Beirut, or, like people that I really look up to, Andrew Hawcroft. So I would highly encourage you to not only become involved in your community, but become a leader in that community. Put yourself out there. Be the person who organizes the talks. Be the person who invites and reaches out to the designers. One of the things that I'm involved is my UCF GDSA, which is like an AIGA. It's like a student group it's a graphic design student association. So I encourage them to get involved, and just in their interactions with inviting people or organizing day conferences, it has led to bigger things. It has led to other things. So I highly encourage you to become a leader in your community. And if you can't find the community that suits you, build one. That's what I did with Giant Illustrators. That's what I did with, at the time it was pre-involvement with AIGA, and I saw this need for an illustration group here in town. and we started together. And it was one of those things that after I started it, people were asking me how to join or where we can meet. It became this thing that we have like an eclectic mix of animators and children's book artists and designers who draw freelance. And we had Shauna Penjezen here, who has since moved to Chicago, but she was in it. Clark Gore is in this photograph here that you might recognize. Ethan Long is an amazing children's book illustrator. They're all amazing. Will Gay, who's the creative director of Disney's Yellow, he's a design director. He's up in Disney's Yellow Shoes. So it's this big, this amazing group of people who we share portfolios and we share sketchbooks and we just talk geekery all day and then build on that community. So if you don't find your community, I highly, highly, highly encourage you to build your own community. This is a biggie for a lot of us, I think, especially the teachers that are here, which is be a mentor and then allow yourself to be mentored. Michael Beirut in one of his talks told us that you could have a mentor even if that person doesn't know that they're your mentor. So sometimes if you ask somebody, say, hey, so-and-so, can you be my mentor? Sometimes they're like, oh, I'd love to, but I don't have time for it. And if it's like an official thing, it might not, it might be something that doesn't, that can't happen. But at the same time, a mentor is just someone who is someone you can ask questions, get advice from, get your 2 cents from, just answer specific questions that you might have in the field. So these are some of my mentors locally. That was our Halloween costume a few years ago. These are all leaders in the creative community in Orlando that I always go back, because Brian Bosch, Devin Horchmeyer, Jeff Matz from Lure. And then in the AIGA Orlando field, I've been a mentor to these. This is Chelsea, Raina, and Tibby. And they're amazing designers. Raina, for instance, just had her work in featured Target Hispanic Heritage Month. She's the one with the glasses and the David Lynch shirt, if you can't see my mouse. And in some ways, the mentorship has been a co-mentoring thing where they've become my mentors in a lot of ways. So this relationship has grown exponentially. So I highly encourage you. I will tell you right now, for you, those of you who are students, right now, you might feel like you're at the bottom rung and you haven't started your career yet. And you're about to, you're trying to kind of like get mentored and meet new people to get jobs. But I guarantee that if you're an upperclassman, there's a lowerclassman looking at you saying, I want to do the work that they're doing. There might be some high school students somewhere that wants to get into your program or do the work that you're doing. So they're looking at your work saying, I want to do what they're doing. So I think there's always an opportunity to mentor and be mentored, even if you don't realize it yet. Even if you might feel like you're on the bottom rung of your career right now, or the lower rung, you'd be surprised who wants to hear your advice, who wants to see what you do, and who wants to get your feedback as well. All right. This is another obvious one. Make something every day. I'm a big sketcher. I'm a huge sketcher. I have books, all sorts of sketchbooks that I keep. Over on our campus bookstore, we have these composition books that they're blank on the inside, and they take the ink really well. I don't know if you can see this. Well, I guess you can see it on your screen too, but they take the ink really well. Those are regular Prismacolors. And I use these books to put in whatever silly idea pops in my head. It's a sketchbook. It's not meant to be something that is final, although it could be, but it's just something to kind of get my ideas out. So sometimes it's marker. I have a few. Sometimes it's marker with Prismacolor markers, like a brush pen with markers. Sometimes it's a book that I bound that I have like different kind of papers in it, whether it's watercolor paper or Arches cover or whatever, that I draw with gouache or whatever, acrylics or whatever. But this is like, I use this as a way to really kind of like be a springboard for other ideas. whether it's about privacy or whatever it might, or they might just be about nothing at all. It just might be that I just like drawing big-headed kids like Mary Blair or whatever. But I just try to make sure that I create something, even if it's terrible, even if it's bad, even if it's kind of like really, really rough, because one thing might lead to another, and it might lead to something else, right? So for instance, this quick little sketch led to a print that I did in like a little bit more formalized print. I started drawing these letter forms of that I call type heads and letter faces. That it was just kind of like a quick little idea that grew into another series, right? Excuse me. So it's not about maybe showing people, it's not about making sure everything's perfect, but it's just about a way to kind of like generate ideas until and to help you try new things. So this is an idea that led to this poster, and this is the third picture is my colleague, who's an amazing printmaker, Ashley Taylor, who started screen printing all these things with 7 screens or whatever she did. So it's that kind of thing, like how one thing can build into another thing. So create something, sculpt something, sketch something out, whatever it is, and then ultimately show it, right? Show it, make connections. This is my good friend Lenny Terenzi, speaking of Creative South connections. Put it out there, because you never know who's watching. And this, every so often I get an illustration gig at Highlights Magazine, and our editor, my creative director there, found me because I would put these illustrations up on Instagram. And from there on, I got several projects. And then finally, surround yourself with people who inspire you. One of the blessings of being a teacher is that I get to hang out all day. As you all know who are teachers in the room, I get to hang out all day and talk design and illustration with like a group of students who are amazing, and they're excited about what they're doing, and they are eager to learn, and they're eager to create, and they keep me on my toes, because I look over their shoulders sometimes and going, man, I got to up my game, because these students are amazing, and they inspire me every day. The conversations we have, the friendships that blossom, that continue after they become alumni. And it's just a really, really great gig to have. If anybody has, even if you don't feel like you're going to be like a long-term teacher, if you ever get the opportunity to teach, even if it's for one semester or half a semester, or whatever, please take it. You'd be surprised how amazing. It's the best gig ever. But surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth, even if it's not one you want to hear. We've already talked, the mentors would do that. I've already talked about the people who surround me from my AIGA community, my AIGA family. Excuse me, but the ones I want to talk about today are this group that I'm with called Limbitless Solutions. I'm an affiliate faculty, and Limbitless is a great organization. It was founded by by engineers who they're literal rocket scientists who have taken it upon themselves to create 3D printed arms for children with limb differences. Not just 3D printed arms. Now we're branching out to adults, veterans. So the work that we do there is, I'm a faculty affiliate. You might have known about us a few years ago because of a video that went viral of this 3D printed arm that was Iron Man motif, and Robert Downey Jr. presented it to one of our bionic kids. But in a world, or in the community culture where a lot of us, especially the university community, where everything's siloed, it's just like so refreshing and so amazing to be part of an organization where it's students from engineering with mathematicians, with marketing students, with ad PR, with fine artists, with graphic designers, with video students, all working towards this one thing, and it's to promote and get 3D printed arms to children with limb differences at no cost to the students. Not to sidetrack here on the really quick on Limitless, but it's crazy how as part of our mission is we try to create these arms for children at no cost to the child themselves. And what one of the downsides of our health system is that it's either really, really expensive to get a prosthetic arm. Sometimes you can only get one in your life. It's like 40,000. Maybe you get one in your lifetime. And as a child, you're expected to grow into it or something like that. Or if you outgrow it, you can't, it's a hassle to get another one. So through creative thinking, through creativity, and again, engineers and fine artists and mathematicians and all that, they've created an arm that is adaptable to the child. The original arm was a little bit more kind of like realistic looking, and they found after their talking to the students is that the students, the children don't necessarily want to blend in. They want to stand out because it's not something, limb difference isn't something that they are ashamed or should be ashamed of. So they just kind of like want to rock it. So we started doing these arms that are adaptable. So some of the areas in the front can be removed. So if one day they feel like something red, they can kind of like remove it and magnetically like connect it, the different color or whatever on it. So it's this really inspiring group of people that we can work with. We also have game designers that have created games, video games, where the controller are connected to the arms. Like if you can imagine like a side-scrolling game, Mario, where Mario has to jump and hit the brick thing with his head. The controller is something that they wrap around their arms or their limb difference, and it teaches them how to contract their muscle in an effort to be able to work the arms. So they're using game design, graphic design, to be able to learn how to work these things, right? So it's an incredible honor to be working with these super smart people. And this marriage of art and technology leads to like really amazing things. And I don't pretend to understand the technology, right? I just kind of listen in and kind of nod politely when they're talking about how they make things work. But they have like a wheelchair that is controlled by the temporal muscles. So if someone is a paraplegic, they can control how the chair moves. So it's things like that that are just kind of like an amazing thing to be a part of. So Limbitless Solution, we'll talk a little bit more about what I do at Limbitless in a second. But one of the things that Meena had mentioned is to talk about is some sort of some of my case studies of what I've done. I'm really happy to see some of my students in this room, by the way. I appreciate y'all showing up, so thank you. So the first one I'm going to talk about is Ruby Tuesday. And a few years ago, I was honored to be able to do the menus for Ruby Tuesday. And the reason I'm showing this one is because it kind of goes back into the notion of, as having different things in my arsenal that I'm able to bring to the client or to bring to the project. And in this case, I was able to be not only the illustrator and the designer, but I was also the writer. I created the games and try to bring the whole kind of like feel of the games together. So I think it's important that if you're good at something, if you're comfortable with something, that you are able to introduce it, so it becomes part of your arsenal. And if not, you partner with someone who can really help you thrive in that area as well. My next case study is for Highlights Magazine. This is the first project I had for Highlights Magazine, and they found me through Instagram, like I mentioned. And so I was doing this project called the Alpha Bug. And the reason I bring up this project is because Highlights was one of the great moments when they called, because I used to read it as a kid. I'd read it to my kids. And so it was really cool to be offered a gig there. So it was funny. I don't know if you can tell, but in the sketch, well, I guess not this sketch, but at some point they had shirts, because I was like, oh, it's weird that they have their letters on their chest. Maybe I'll give them shirts. So the conversation was like, well, if you have shirts, you have to have pants, because you can't have shirt. It might be okay for you to have neither, but if you have shirts, you need to be wearing pants. So I was like, okay, that was a really interesting conversation. And I could just kind of like imagine like the conference room rule about, because you think about like Donald Duck wears a shirt with no pants, but when he comes out of the shower, he has a towel around his shirt. So it's like that kind of like the whole thing is like that people that they have to think about for things like this. So I just thought that was a really cool, fun conversation that we had for that one. And then the other one is New Hope for Kids. New Hope for Kids is, the reason I bring this one up is because a lot of times we, as students, we get into this thing where we want to build our portfolio, but we can't get a job until we have experience. But we can't get experience until we have the job. We can't until we have the work, right? It's one of those catch-22 things. So I would highly encourage you all, if you haven't already, I'm a big believer in getting paid for your work. Do not do free work. It kind of not only belittles your own work, but it's detrimental to the whole industry. That said, I believe in pro bono work, especially for organizations who are nonprofits that are doing the good work. And New Hope for Kids is a company, is a nonprofit, I should say, that provides free counseling for kids who have had a loss in their lives, whether it's a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, free of charge, right? So they work off of donations. And as a class, we always do, as a project their annual report. So I would highly encourage, if you need more things for your portfolio, that you reach out to a company that you believe in and offer to do the work for them. Again, it's not free work in my eyes, it becomes pro bono because they're doing the good work. And in this case, they didn't take it, and you can look up the New Hope for Kids logo if you like. But every now and then I do work for them. I pitch logo ideas. I do things that that might be able to help them out in the long run of their anything I can. I think the power of design, one of them is that if they feel that if a nonprofit seems like they have their stuff together visually, studies show that their donations go up. So find something you believe in and put yourself out there and encourage encourage them to do work. 9 times out of 10, they're going to say, yes, we'd love to have a designer work for us or work with us and partner up with them. And a lot of times they give you liberties to do whatever it is that you want. And then finally, I'm going to talk about specifically what I do with Limbitless Solutions. I'm an affiliate faculty, so I consult with the designs. And one of the things that I was able to do is work on the Bionic Kid comic book. So this is Zachary Pambukas. He's one of our Bionic kids in Limbitless Solutions. Once he asked his father, Nico, they live in Seattle, how much is it for one of these arms? How much did it cost to make and to get to the students? And he realized that money was more than he had in his piggy bank. So he decided to do something to pay it forward. So he decided to create this character called the Bionic Kid, and he created a story along with his brother Cristo. We sell these comic books, or they sell these comic books in an effort to raise money to pay it forward. And at the time, he was like, I think he's maybe 12 now, so he must have been like 7 or something crazy like that. And like, to pay it forward. So they take this money and donate it to the to be able to buy to fund arms for future children who have limb differences and need a bionic arm. So this is a more recent picture of Zach and his brother Cristo. Zach's on the left, and they're just an amazing group. To be able to collaborate with someone who has such a positive story, that is trying to make sure that kids who are like him aren't ashamed of who they are, that are proud of themselves and everything they do, is really amazing. And this is our creative director on the left for Limbitless. He's a colleague of mine that teaches the head of experimental animation here at our SVAD at UCF, Matt Dombrowski. He's also the creative director at Limbitless. And he's my partner in crime with a lot of things Limbitless. And so together we created this comic book. It's one of the many things that we do at Limbitless. But it's been a very kind of like an amazing process to work with these young men and do this be able to share the stories. And it's grown into something else. Michael Rosenbaum had him on this podcast talking about what they do and what they're trying to do. Dominic Sherwood right now is doing a campaign with us. He's an actor, and if you follow him on Instagram, you'll see that he'll have the links to be able to donate for the digital copy, buy a digital copy, and all the monies go towards that. So they've gotten the word out. They've been on TV. They've been on conferences, speaking in conferences. So it's this really, really great organization that I'm happy to be and proud to be a part of. So just to kind of sum things up, creativity matters. I hope my story has kind of shed some light on how I do things. But just remember, creativity matters, but it's meaningless unless you follow it up with action, right? So I want to thank you for having me today. Thank you, Meena, and thank you everything else. I'll kind of like close with the same thing I tell my kids when they go to school and my students when I dismiss class. Be good, be strong, and be brave. So thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Wow, Victor, thank you so much. That was an incredible talk, and it was super moving at parts. I want to open up the floor for any questions that students might have. Like, you can unmute yourselves. You don't have to turn on your camera if you don't like, or you can post in the chat. But to get us rolling, I do want to ask, and we've only got about 9 more minutes left. And I'm still choked up from the Limitless talk, but just to ask you, what led you to become an educator? Because you clearly have been working as a designer and an illustrator and doing the work. What brought you to teaching?
So I worked on campus. I just realized Alex Mira was here. He's awesome, by the way. Maybe a future speaker too. So.
No, I've got my speaker on. Thank you for the props. Appreciate it. This is your talk. You go.
Thank you. I worked on campus, and they offered. I kind of fell into it, if I'm being completely honest. I worked on campus, so they started offering the MFA. So I was like, all right, I'll get an MFA. I'm already here. And then the opportunity came in for me to teach. I taught at other places, like I taught at the online, at an art institute online, and I taught at Rollins College here in town for like adjunct semesterly stuff. But when the opportunity presented itself here on campus, I jumped at it. I was like, yeah. And again, it was also one of those things I almost turned it down because I was like, public speaking, I don't know if it's something that I can do, but then I just kind of forced myself to take that leap and go with it.
Gosh, so you got to stay in to stay in your in your city, in your state too.
Yeah.
That's
my alma mater. Yeah.
That's the dream. That's great.
Yeah, it worked out. It worked out. My family's still in town. Everybody's still here. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. So any other questions for Victor? I feel like I know Victor too well. I shouldn't ask a lot of questions.
I see a few of my students. Really, thank you for coming out. I always think that I ramble in class. I'm surprised that you guys want to hear more. So I do thank you for coming.
I'm surprised that you were hesitant to become an educator, because you're the archetype of an educator. So I'm just surprised that there was any kind of hesitation at any point.
Thank you. That's sweet of you to say. Yeah, it's something that I've kind of like worked at to do. I've talked to Meena about this in the DEC meetings sometimes, that I don't think my mind sometimes is very academic, but I do enjoy being around the students, and I do enjoy kind of helping the students that way. So, and again, they keep me on my toes. They make me better, I think. And I think the hardest thing that I have with teaching is when a student asks me how I do something, and then I have to think of like, I don't know, how do I do something? Because it's like you're on autopilot for 20 years, and then when somebody asks you to repeat it, you're just like, you have to kind of like reassess everything you do, and then you're like, why am I still doing it this way when there's a better way to do it? So it's like they keep you on your toes. And I think I've grown so much in the last 10 years that I've been teaching.
So we do have one question from a student, Sean. Sean, thanks for being here.
John.
Have you done mostly freelance work, or have you worked in design firms, or have you been in-house or agency? How have you worked?
So, so straight out of college, I worked in an in-house agency doing food promotions for other companies. And then I worked in a small company for like a few months on a contract work as an animator using Flash. You know, this is like 20 years ago, doing storyboards and things like that. And then I started working in-house at UCF. And for the most part, that was when my career has been. But at the same time, I think this goes with a lot of people, like when you do your day job and then you go home and you do your freelance stuff. So at the same time that I had my in-house stuff, I was doing like freelance stuff for like Scholastic and for Ruby Tuesdays and for all these cool companies that would allow me to work with them. So it's a little bit of both, because sometimes, you know, depending on what we have going on at work, sometimes the creative itch wasn't scratched in the way that you want it to be. So you have to kind of like push your goals in other ways.
I did the same thing when I was coming up too. I feel that. I think we have time for one more question. And Marius, you had unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a comment, and I said this in the chat, that Victor, I think you're the perfect example for our students why we want them to, why we're trying to incorporate illustration into our design program, because I think you do a really good job of sort of blurring the lines, and I can sort of see where your design skills affect your illustration and vice versa. So I just want to make that comment to the students that's why we do push that. And then I was going to also say, or ask you if you want to be my mentor, that'd be great. You know,
As long as you can be mine too. Yeah, let's co-mentor. Absolutely.
Can you be my mentor too?
Yeah,
I want this on that.
we can do the whole co-mentoring thing. Absolutely. Mina's been my
We gotta do it in
mentor for-
Spanish though. We gotta do it in Spanish.
Absolutely. And we can talk mentorship, we can talk soccer, the whole thing, football.
Oh yeah, we do.
Yeah. So absolutely.
I do have one more quick question, and I don't want to take time from a student, but I noticed in your work and behind you, you have Superman. Can you? I think you mentioned a little bit, but what is is Superman sort of like a inspiration for you, or you feel a connection to that, or is that just me picking up on that?
No, that's totally the way. Elsewhere in my office, there'll be like other things of Superman. There's like little Superman drawing up there that I got at AmeriCon. I keep pictures of my students everywhere. So it's definitely a thing. I think the thing with Superman is like, so I came of age in the 80s, and I was born in the 70s. So it's like one of those things that when I saw Christopher Reeve pick up that, catch that helicopter, it was one of those things that just kind of like the late 70s and the 80s, growing up a child of the 80s, I think, we have the retro thing now, but being there when it was all happening. So we went from like Superman to like Star Wars to like Star Trek and Back to the Future, and all those things that just kind of like, it just blew our imagination open. And it was like all these things that we wanted to, because there were characters that were inspired by past things that were never, like now it seems like we're revisiting some past ideas, but a lot of things that were going on at the time as a kid were Pee-wee's Playhouse. Absolutely. Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So it's just those things that was just kind of like so eye-opening. And I totally believed that Christopher Reeve as Superman flew up, because it was like seamless, and you don't see wires, you don't get the sense. But it's also, so just a little bit going back a little bit of my psyche, I have a few kind of like leading, when I think about leadership, I'm a big Trekkie too, I'm a Trekker. When I think about leadership, I think about how I need to act to people and how I'd like to be people to act to me, towards me. And for leadership, it's always kind of like Jean-Luc Picard. What would Jean-Luc do? Like in a leadership situation, he'd surround himself with smarter people than him, listen to them, and come up with an answer that way. I don't know if you guys watch the West Wing, but Leo McGarry, the John Spencer character, is another person I kind of go to all the time, because he takes care of his people right? And he's the confidant of the president. Things like that. More recently, Ted Lasso, but I think it's one of those things that he's one of those characters that, and it might seem cheesy now to look back compared to like other characters, but he was someone who was truly trying to help. He could do anything in the world, but he chose to use his powers to help other people. He could do whatever. He could rule the world if he wanted to, but he chose to help. And I think that's always like connected with me with Superman. As old-fashioned as that might sound, it's just one of those things that always struck with me.
We have another question, and then we'll end it here. Katina wants to know what advice you might have for new educators. Any tips for new educators? And I also told her to reach out to me, but tips for new educators.
We just had a panel on new educators last month for the DEC that I would encourage you to go back and watch. Right? So my first semester, my friend Matt Dombrowski, who was teaching a few years before I did, he has his way of doing things. And my mentor, as for teaching, Chuck Abraham, has his way of doing things. My first year, I would come in with like slacks and like shoes, like shoes that you have to polish that made me sound like I was riding a horse when I was going down the hallway. And I, like a button down. And I felt like that is what a teacher was supposed to be. And I would try to do my class like what I saw other people doing it. And I didn't feel like I was getting through to the students then. So eventually I started trying to be a little bit more me, slowly but surely, trying to be okay with just being me. I wore jeans, I wore my Chucks, I wore a hoodie. This semester, I started wearing blazer to class, but I traditionally wore hoodies just because, well, it was cold in the classroom, but I was just trying to be like a little bit more me. And I think the main advice is I think you got your job as a teacher for a reason, because you understand what you're supposed to do. You understand the content. And my main advice is try not to be too much like that other person who is an awesome teacher, but try not to replicate. I guess the same thing as designers. Try not to be inspired by that person, but don't replicate exactly what somebody else does, because that way I just wasn't connecting with students, and it was a rough first semester, that I didn't feel like I was quite catching on yet. So that's my advice: be yourself, just like anything else. And you have your own unique point of view, so embrace that point of view and go for it, because I think the beauty of having a faculty with many different people is that they each have their own point of view. So if I'm working on a department, if Meena is my colleague, we might agree on certain things, but we might not agree on other things. And I think where that disagreement comes in, if it's a friendly kind of like discourse of disagreement, I think that's when knowledge can expand, right? I can learn something from her, she can learn something from me, and hopefully the students can learn something from both of us.
Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate all the faculty at GD+I at U of SC. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for coming out on a Thursday night. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, or if you want to continue the discourse. I appreciate my students who came in, Envy and Marcella and Mark Bowden, I saw there as well. So, and Alex and everyone else is surprised, who I might not see on the list, but thank you so much. Ashley Taylor, my colleague, she's here too. So I appreciate you all coming in. So thank you so much, Meena. This is fun. And
this was great. We had
appreciate you all.
We had some cool people come in here too, so we really appreciate that. Everybody have a wonderful night, and thank you again, Victor.